Right now to have Nobel Prize winner in 2000, James Heckman. Any loyal viewers of the show remember Austin Goolsbee, who was actually his research assistant at Yale University, had some nice words to say about him. After the interview, said James Heckman is the smartest living economist. So Heckman, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think Austin is a great economist, so I'm glad we're complimenting each other. But he was my RA, and then I followed his career, and I followed his career when he finally ended up here in Chicago, which is good.
So we'll get to some political stuff right off the bat. One of the most important works that you do, it seems, is human capital. In other words, how much investment people place in themselves. And one of the early things that you find, correct me if I'm wrong, is that early investment in education matters quite a bit. Isn't that true?
That's true, but I mean, that's common sense.
Yeah.
There's nothing very profound in that, except that most public policy is ignoring the very early years. Right. I mean, especially for disadvantaged children. And by disadvantaged children, I mean people who are born into families where there really are bad environments. And we know an increasing fraction of children are being born into these. A greater fraction of all children are now born in what we call at-risk environments than probably any time in the, at least in the last 50 years. That's black and white, it's Hispanic, it's across the board. It's a serious issue. One
of the things to combat that Hillary Clinton is proposing is universal pre-K. Do you like that idea?
Well, yes and no. I mean, first of all, I think the problem with universal pre-K is that it misses the point, which is that universal is not needed for affluent and middle-class children. They get wonderful parenting. As a group, they get wonderful parenting. If you look at most of the studies about early intervention, what you find is that middle-class kids and upper-middle-class kids are doting on their children. You're probably a product of such doting. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that there is a tremendous influence of the early years on later childhood outcomes. And that middle-class and upper-middle-class families are showering their kids with all kinds of intellectual stimulation, social-emotional support. What we've learned, though, is how disadvantaged families, and we're talking about children born to teenage mothers who are literate or very poor language and math skills, are essentially just not parenting correctly. They're not encouraging the child and so forth. And what we also learned, these have lasting consequences. These bad family practices, these unfortunate family practices accumulate and lead to serious disadvantage. So that's a serious issue.
So that's the theory, but moving to policy, how do you create a policy that says an arbitrary number, 50,000 or less, you get pre-K for free, if not, you got to pay for it? Like, how do you create a policy that's specifically designated for poor children?
Well, I think you can make it somewhat a matter of choice, and you can condition on family income, and you can condition on family circumstance. I mean, these are what are sometimes called targeted transfers. You really are targeting individuals who are at risk. We have at-risk factors. So you could imagine making universal pre-K, I don't care if it's universal or not, but making sure that you don't charge the most disadvantaged people. Where the line should be drawn, well, this is a problem we face every day in a number of issues. I mean, I would argue that we have a pretty clear idea from the experiments that have been done where severe disadvantage is. And so the whole political discussion will be going to err on one side or the other. But I think we have a pretty good idea that severely disadvantaged mothers who are high school dropouts, mothers who have all kinds of social problems and so forth, drug problems, maybe are on parole or have been arrested in the past, are likely candidates for this. And I think there's a gray line there that you can make. I don't think it's a hard and fast rule, obviously. I also think you should make and it doesn't bother me, and there's no reason why we shouldn't consider universal pre-K, but universal pre-K such that the affluent are paying for it, so we don't subsidize. There's no reason to. There was a study that was done in North Carolina a few years ago, quite a few years ago, but a repeat of the study that was done more recently. And this is a so-called obfuscarian study. You probably heard about it. That study was actually done on poor children, disadvantaged kids, and it had big effects. The kids are now in their 20s. However, the same study was done to affluent kids in North Carolina, same area. These were college kids, basically. And it turned out that the difference between the treatment and control in that sample was zero. There was no effect of the program. Why? Well, because families, they already got it.
So here's my question. I mean, not to dote on you, but objectively, you do a lot of work in economics. You're clearly very bright. Does a Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama call you up and ask you for your advice? Like, is there a connect between your work and actual politics? Do people call you up, or do you call them up?
There is a connect. There is. I mean, people call me up. They're calling me up even this weekend.
Who called you up?
Well, I mean, I mean, I've been approached by various groups, Clinton's group sometime before, and Obama more recently, and so forth. I mean,
how about the Republicans?
Not to date. No.
Really?
Not to date. No, not to date.
I mean, you advocate for a lot of free market principles. They don't come to you?
Well, I mean, I haven't been approached to this moment. No, sorry.
Does that? Do you?
Well, maybe they have other substitutes here. Don't forget Gary Becker's here, and there are many others.
He just got awarded the congressional.
Yeah, not congressional.
Congressional presidential.
Presidential Medal of Freedom, it's called.
Yeah.
And no, and he's closer probably to the president these days because he's at Hoover, and there's a tighter connection. My own view is that I'm actually more apolitical. I mean, I certainly am in favor of incentives, and I certainly think markets are powerful, and I think they work. So that's not. But that's a kind of a common sense statement these days. I mean, Tony Blair said that. Bill Clinton said
it's
that.
common sense, but I watch these debates and they're arguing the merits of free trade. I mean,
that's totally political.
No, it is totally political.
Yeah.
But like, as an economist, can you even watch these debates and hear hear like irrational economic statements?
Well, I know why I mean, I can watch it and I know why they're doing it, but I don't support it. I mean, I think it's a mistake to start talking about protectionism at this point. But I understand, especially if you want to carry the state of Ohio probably next time.
With steel and stuff like that.
Right, steel, autos, and so forth. There has been real harm caused. In the short run, those people are going to be worse off. And closing the gates down. Now people are against NAFTA.
Here's one other thing. How do you convince the American public of the power of low prices? I mean, a direct result from free trade is they can go to Walmart and get cheap goods. I mean, is there any way, like from a communication standpoint, you've thought about how to convince the American people about the power of free trade?
Well, it's funny you mention that because I just happened to notice. I forgot what it was. It was an ad. I was listening to it on the radio where Walmart, I think, or at least some other large-scale discounter, was actually estimating how much money they saved the consumer that year by buying at the store. I think it does require more economic education. I mean, look, the so-called big box project. Remember the notion is any Walmart or any large whole discounter operating in Chicago should pay extra taxes, and there should be support for unions. There are these well-entrenched interest groups that are very articulate, and the fact is, consumer benefits don't have a large-scale interest group. But I think at this point, I think the majority of Americans understand that free trade is going to result in lower prices. I'm confident of that. But I'm also confident that people like Edwards and other candidates are going to try to make hay out of the fact that they're unemployed workers. They're going to see some gain to their livelihood if they can somehow shut the doors.
And they're not going to tell the truth.
I don't think they're telling the truth. I can't imagine Edwards honestly believes that free trade...
He doesn't. He signed free trade deals with China and when he was in the Senate, and now he's changing.
Exactly.
You speak about economic education. We're at a school where an art or music or drama is required, humanities is required, no economic or finance 101, high school is not required. Do you think the idea of a mandated econ or finance 101 would greatly improve students not taking out large debts, understanding the power of low prices? Do you think the idea of mandating an economics class would be worthwhile?
Well, I mean, I don't like the compulsion under any event, generally.
So you don't like the core?
Well, there's a sense here where you have to debate it. No, I don't think the core, I think the core serves its purpose. Why? Because there is a standard curriculum. I mean, Chicago has been famous for teaching price theory and for teaching basic economics. I think students should have a minimum standard. That's true.
But you'll have kids here who will take poli-sci and history and have like far left-wing beliefs and never even be exposed to Econ 101 here.
No, I think it is unfortunate, and I do think that there is a bias, just a general intellectual bias against the free market in many areas of the humanities, even other social
colonizations.
sciences.
I took a class. I mean, you might agree or disagree, but for example, I wrote a paper for colonizations that basically argued that slavery died off for economic reasons, not moral reasons. And I said that, you know, when it comes to slavery,
well, that's just not true in terms of the evidence.
Why is the evidence completely against that? I mean, you treat people so poorly, they're going to revolt. I mean, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution. I'm not saying with clear conviction, but why is it so irrational to say that slavery ended in many regards because of economic reasons?
Well, in some cases, I'm sure it did, but it actually, in the United States, and one of the great controversies that Vogel's book, Time on the Cross, showed, was that in 1860, just at the verge of the Civil War, the last time there were reliable statistics, that in fact slavery was a very promising enterprise. It was actually very productive.
Because less slaves and they were more valuable.
But they were more valuable, and it turned out there was still a huge demand for cotton.
There was a huge, but the thing
it was
is
growing. I mean, England was living on
yeah,
it.
but you know what? Do you know why the South wasn't really supported in the Civil War? Because they found an alternative cotton supply in Egypt.